my English barley wine, and I took half the grains, so it's about 32 pounds of grain total. Took half the grains and mashed those just as you normally would. I then took the wort from that, took the runnings from that, and used that as my strike water for the second batch of grain.
Okay. Did you sparge at all?
I sparged a little bit. I mean, I sparged enough. I mean, basically, I was okay with collecting more than what I ultimately needed. I ended up doing a 4-hour boil to boil away a lot of that.
Wow.
So I mean, so the results of my first runnings, as I recall, was about 1090, or the first runnings with some sparging was about 1090. Then that became the wort or the strike water for the second batch of grains, where I mashed those grains, and coming off of that, I took and sparged that. I ended up with about 9.5 gallons. It was pretty much my full 10-gallon pot full of water for a 5-gallon batch. So I boiled away the extra 4 gallons or so, were a 4-hour boil, and came out of that with a starting gravity of 1160.
So did you do Partigyle at all? Was it just
not Partigyle that? I mean, there's probably, at the end of that, I probably could have Partigyle, but we were talking about a 12-hour brew day here, so I wasn't into Partygiling.
Okay.
Spawning another set of stuff coming off of that. So
that's what's been hanging me up, because how do you mash, and then you take the first runnings, and then do you sparge into a different kettle, and then you remash again, and then you take first runnings.
The liquid from the first mash. Yeah, the liquid from the first mash was what went into the second as the starting.
I understand,
I think what John's asking is you mash the first grains, first running, and you probably sparge to get more sugars out of that. You collected all of that,
yes, I sparged
and then
down,
use that for the second. So you did a full mash and a sparge on the first 32 pounds, collected that, and then use that for the next batch.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So I did sparge, and I ended up with at least 9 gallons of liquid.
Yeah.
For a 5-gallon batch to boil.
Okay.
So it was, I collected more water than I needed by the time I got done sparging the first batch, and then using that, and then sparging again the second time. For the second batch, I ended up with 9 gallons total.
Okay. So what I had heard of was where somebody they had the first runnings into one kettle, and then the sparge into a second kettle, and then they used the first runnings as the strike water in the second mash. First runnings went into the first kettle, second runnings went into a second kettle. See what I mean? So you've got two different like beers where you're getting the first runnings, all the first runnings into one, but then you're getting all the second runnings, so 2 rounds of second runnings into another kettle.
Right. So that sounds like Partigyle, where you're actually getting 2 different beers, a big one and a little one.
Right, but it's double Partigyle.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of playing the tricks with my head.
There was a time when we were doing IPAs for the club, and Jeff came over, and we did a Partigyle IPA, where I ended up with a double IPA from the first runnings, and ended up with a session IPA from the second runnings, and then we each shepherded, fermentation-wise, we each took those and carried forward with them, and we worked to try and get them balanced the way we wanted them. We had some the second runnings and did some mixing of the first running, second running back and forth to get the gravity levels that we were aiming for, which, as I recall, was like a 60-40 split that we were trying to get as our OGs on the 2 different beers. So, and then we carried on with that. So it took more grain than you would put into just the one double IPA to start with. But then, because the total gravity that we were trying to get out of the set of grains was really the combination of the two.
Right.
This was what we needed, and then we would use the first running, second runnings, a split between those to then balance it to get the 60-40 where we wanted it to be.
Okay.
There's actually mash calculators for doing Partigyle. I've done 2 Partigyles in the last 3 months, and they've both been on New England IPAs. And the first one I did, I brought actually to round 5 of Der Hoosier. Went to the reward ceremony, and we all tried it. And I had a 1070 starting, 1055, and a 10. So
you got 3 beers out of it.
I got three 5-gallon batches out of 28 pounds of grain, and
wow.
I put amylase enzyme in the second mash, and then that really over it. So the second beer and the third beer, the 1055 and the 1028, were a little astringent. The 1070 was like nectar from heaven. It was so good. The first runnings were delicious, absolutely delicious. Just repeated that. And I only made 2 beers this time, so I got a 1075 and I got a 1058. Those beers are both very good as well, but I use the same 28 pounds of grain. So it's one mash grain bill, but just keep running, basically. It's interesting. I'm curious, Lee, about the method of using the actual wort for the strike water. Is that something you read about? Is there a group that does that? I'm not familiar with that.
There was something that I read about it. They called it, I want to say they referred to it as a reiterative mash.
Yeah.
But there was at least one podcast. There was a podcast I know that I listened to, and this was after I did it. But they actually were talking about Partigyle and reiterative mash and stuff on the Brewing Network or one of
the Zana Show.
I don't think I found the podcast until after I'd done it, but I listened to a podcast that described very similar, although there were things that, other little kind of tweaks that picked up in, and I said, if I'm ever going to do this again, then I need to go back and listen to that podcast again and incorporate whatever.
That's what put me on it, was listening to that podcast. And I was amazed that you could get basically double the OG by using the runoffs in as a strike water in the next iteration.
Yeah, and in that podcast, the question was asked about how efficient can the second mash be, and the answer was, based on their testing and stuff, that it was pretty darn close to being as efficient as being getting twice the OG out of twice the 2 iterations of the grain. In the end, when you're Partigyling, you're trying to you can calculate how much overall OG do I want. I mean, if I were going to, I think it's maybe almost as simple as saying, what's the average OG that I need, given twice, if I want a 5-gallon and you have to split a 10-gallon batch into 2 5s with 60-40 split, then I could just take the average of the OG of the 2 beers that I was aiming for, and build me a 10-gallon beer at that OG, and then just manage my first running and second running so that I get 60% of the sugar in one and 40 in the other, if that's what you're aiming for.
Right.
So I'm kind of curious about your Partigyle, and you mentioned that the first one was nectar of the gods, and the second 2 were astringent. I'm assuming your first running that you did not sparged all in the first running, and the second 2 were sparged.
Right. So I gave them all 3 the same hop profile, and so these were first were hopped. They were hopped in Whirlpool or hop stand, and then I hopped right before I pitched the yeast. They were all Voskevike. They were all fermented at 85 degrees, which is crazy, in a very short period of time. And the reason the ones number 2 and number 3 were astringent was because, in my assessment, I think that my water pH started to drop down. I think that I lost So I actually acidulated my strike water more in my second go at the Partigyle. I think that was the issue I had. What was interesting too was the colors were very different. If you look at the first time, the first runnings on my first Partigyle Nipah was almost like a West Coast double. It was very clear. I had very little of the cloudiness from my mash bill is 80% two row, 10% wheat, 10% oats, right? So it's kind of classic. And so the astringency came, I think, from not only the higher pH water, but also I think I had a little more hop bite. I think the hops, because I would dry hop this in the keg for about 48 hours. With about 3 ounces of hops. So there's a little bit of hop bite I think I got too from the bitterness there. So that's what ended up in my brews. So working away from that, my second time I did it was much better. So 2 beers are better than one. Or yeah.
There's a lot of grain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'd be nice to be able to get 3 beers. If you're using 28 pounds of grain, nice to get 3 beers.
Exactly. I'll tell you, my mash tun's only a 10-gallon mash tun, and I could get like 6 gallons of water in there, I think it was. And it's like I got like 3 gallons out. I mean, it's so much water absorption, it wasn't even funny. It was crazy. And then I diluted that back up to get a boil for my first beer. So
Nice.